I'm Rob Lane. I've worked at the medical school since 2002. I initially worked solely in communication skills, but now work more broadly. I'm the Associate Director for Medical Education Programmes, and I chair the Assessment and Standards Boards, as well as heading communication skills and leading the Ideal strand. I've been asked to talk to you about my first stethoscope. That's not hard because I've only ever had one stethoscope throughout all my professional career. When I qualified, the course was very much divided into preclinical and clinical sections, and it was quite a big deal when you moved from year 2 to year 3 of acquiring a stethoscope. Mine came from my mother. She was a radiographer, and she'd had a stethoscope left behind in the department, and it had stood around for 2 to 3 months without being claimed, so she gave it to me, and I've stuck with it since. I think the only original bits of it left now are the metal frame. Everything else has been changed. It's had a new diaphragm, new earpieces, new tubing, but it's the same old stethoscope I've carried throughout my whole career. Obviously there are different perspectives to take into account when the stethoscope's being used. The doctor is often focused on the listening and very frequently requiring silence and some cooperation from the patient in breathing at the right time, leaning forward, leaning to the side. Whereas from the patient's perspective, it's a time when perhaps the doctor isn't communicating, and there are silences, and they can create anxieties for a patient. I suspect that to bridge that gap, the doctor needs to continually explain what is going on. So when we're using the stethoscope, it's important that we explain to the patient why we're doing it, what we're listening to, and why we perhaps need some silence, and why we need a patient perhaps to breathe in deeply, breathe out slowly, to lean to one side, to lean forward, and that forms the communication that goes around using a stethoscope. But to use it effectively, some silence is obviously required. And it does give the doctor time to think as well, without having to talk and to explain. But again, I think the important thing is that having thoughts, the doctor needs then to share those thoughts with the patient, even if they're surrounded with uncertainty. I suspect the stethoscope is going to get less important as time goes on. As technology has advanced, we tend to rely less and less on the listening and more on results of imaging to tell us what's going on. I remember as a medical student spending hours listening to murmurs, trying to differentiate which one was which, whereas now we'd probably just do it with an echocardiogram. I guess the stethoscope also has a second purpose. We use it functionally in our clinical work, but it's always been a symbol of being a doctor. And again, we tend to see people walking around with their stethoscopes to show that they are a doctor. Although again, this is diminishing as more other professions use stethoscopes and display them equally to the public.